Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you all today. The COVID pandemic has been a humbling reminder that diseases know no borders. Today, top experts continue their efforts to develop new vaccines to help make more diseases vaccine preventable, including our partners at Takeda. I'm really excited to introduce our next speakers. Please welcome Dr. Angel Rosas, Medical Director for the U.S. Dengue Vaccine Program at Takeda, and Gail Hawk, a public health clinical nurse specialist and Shot at Life champion for a Q&A about dengue.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Hi, Gail.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Orlando's still good, correct?
It's still good. It's
All
perfect.
right. Okay, so before we get started, although dengue is not one of the vaccine preventable diseases that we as champions focus on, and it doesn't impact the budget considerations that Brian has discussed with us previously today, we do want all of our champions to be informed regarding diseases and vaccine equity outside of the 4 diseases that we focus on. So I do have some questions for you, and I'll start with what is dengue and why is it important?
Okay, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Gail, for
Mhm.
this opportunity for the question. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Angel Rosas. I'm the medical director for the U.S. Dengue Vaccine Program for Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Okay, so dengue is a virus. Actually, is a family of genetically related viruses and comes in 4 different flavors. They're referred to as serotypes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's a viral disease that is transmitted, but it's not transmitted directly from human to human. It actually needs a vector, and that vector is a mosquito, particularly the Aedes mosquito, especially Aedes aegypti and to a lesser extent Aedes albopictus. So how does this mosquito cause the disease? Well, let's assume, but let's look into the slide and we can see here the cycle of infection. So we start with a person that is already infected with dengue. So the mosquito, the Aedes mosquito, bites this person, okay, and becomes infected itself, okay? And the virus then begins to replicate in the mosquito's midgut and salivary glands. The mosquito that likes to feed early in the morning and late in the afternoon, so has breakfast and dinners, will eventually bite another person that is presumably not infected and infects that person. Okay. So once the mosquito bites that person, the virus enters the bloodstream. It begins to attack the target cells, which are the white blood cells. And in about so there's an incubation period of about 4 to 10 days, after which the person may or may not feel the symptoms of the disease. But the virus still continues to circulate for some time in the bloodstream and given the opportunity, again, for a mosquito to bite this person again and then continue with this transmission cycle. Um, Most dengue infections are silent, meaning asymptomatic. You never think that you ever got infected, and in fact, you wouldn't even you wouldn't even know that the mosquito bit you because the mosquito doesn't leave any bite marks behind. And about 25% of the infections do become symptomatic. Symptoms, for the most part, are not specific. They're similar to symptoms that you experience from other arboviral diseases and even the flu and COVID. So if you do suffer symptoms, usually the first phase is a febrile phase that lasts up to 1 week, and it's a very unpleasant experience. It is characterized by lethargy, high fever with headaches, muscle and joint pain, nausea, vomiting, and a distinctive rash. Actually, if you touch the rash and then take your hand away, you would see that the skin forms a white patch where your hand touched. But one notorious symptom of dengue infection is extreme bone pain. And patients keep saying that, they feel like their bones are shattering. That's why dengue is often referred to as the break bone disease. Most people recover from this febrile phase, but others, unfortunately, move into a critical phase, okay, and where the fever drops, but unfortunately, their blood vessels become more permeable, leading to plasma leakage, fluid accumulation, respiratory distress. It can lead to dengue hemorrhagic fever, shock, and unfortunately, death if there's not appropriate care. Most people with appropriate care then recover from the disease, okay? And that involves general reabsorption of fluids. Problems may occur, however, with excessive or prolonged administration of IV fluids because this could lead to hypervolemia. Well, as you can see, this disease is very, very unpleasant and potentially deadly. Why is it important to us? Well, because about 50%, half of the world's population, is at risk of acquiring this disease. Every year, there are about 400 million infections. About a quarter of them, 100 million, are symptomatic cases, and there are about 40,000 deaths. But let me tell you, these are gross underestimates of the disease. The numbers are much likely much higher than this. In fact, the WHO declared dengue as one of the top threats to global health in 2019, along with HIV/AIDS, pandemic influenza, and vaccine hesitancy. This disease is very prevalent, as I said, in many parts of the world. Half of the world is at risk of contracting dengue. It is estimated that dengue is present in about 129 countries, and the incidence of this disease has increased 30-fold since the 1960s and 8-fold in the last 20 years alone. This explosion in dengue cases is due to several factors. Increased travel is one of them. Okay, if you travel to a dengue endemic area, yes, you are at risk of exposure and contracting the disease. Uh, Urbanization. The mosquito, you're not going to get this disease going to the forest or to the jungle because the mosquito, the Aedes mosquito that transmits the disease, is more of an urban mosquito. Okay, so if you're in the cities in an endemic country, you are likely to be exposed to the mosquito. And climate change. Okay, and yes, climate change is real. The warmer the temperatures get, the better for the mosquito because the mosquito thrives on warmer, humid environments. Currently, dengue is endemic in many parts of Asia, especially Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Americas. In fact, the only two countries that do not experience local transmission of dengue are Canada, and in the Americas are Canada and Chile. Dengue is endemic in the U.S. territories of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and American Samoa, and is also present in Hawaii, South Florida, and Southwest Texas, the Rio Grande Valley area that borders with Mexico. Unfortunately, it's expected that the Aedes mosquito that carries the dengue and other diseases like Zika and chikungunya will continue to expand its reach.
So it's evident from what you've shared with us that
Mhm.
the burden of disease from dengue is significant.
It
And our
is.
focus as Shot at Life advocates is on vaccines and vaccine equity. Can you tell us about what work Takeda is doing on the dengue vaccine and how you see it
Oh,
being
absolutely.
incorporated
Yes,
in,
absolutely.
into routine immunization programs? And
Yes.
discuss any distribution challenges you may expect.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for this
Mhm.
opportunity. So Takeda is currently working on a dengue vaccine candidate. And as you can see here in this slide, the vaccine is still currently under investigation. And the target product profile for this vaccine is a vaccine that for the prevention of dengue disease that is caused by any of the four dengue serotypes in individuals aged 4 to 60 years of age. regardless of whether they have been exposed to dengue or not. This vaccine is the dosing schedule would be two doses, 3 months apart. It's going to be for subcutaneous use in an injection, and it will come as a lyophilized vaccine for reconstitution, and the vaccine will be stored at 4 degrees. So it's 2 to 8 degrees, no more fridge temperatures. So again, as I said, this vaccine, which we refer to as TAC-03, this vaccine candidate, has been evaluated very extensively in several clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, altogether included more than 28,000 participants around the world in both endemic and non-endemic countries with about 88 investigational sites. So this vaccine again has undergone a tremendous amount of evaluation, and in fact, the phase 3 trial lasted 4.5 years to evaluate the safety, efficacy, and immunogenicity of this
Mhm.
vaccine.
How do you see it being um, incorporated into routine programs?
Okay, our goal is to obtain a um, routine recommendations for the use of the vaccine in the U.S. territories, particularly Puerto Rico, because those are the territories that are truly endemic to the disease. And this recommendation, a routine recommendation, is important to ensure equitable access to the vaccine for all individuals, children and adults, who qualify based on the age of recommendation. In the continental US, because it's not considered endemic, and also Hawaii, the goal is to obtain recommendation for use as a travel vaccine for individuals, children, and adults who are traveling to dengue endemic areas or countries. Unfortunately, in this case, the vaccine will be an out-of-pocket expense because travel vaccines are not always covered by insurance, I should
Mhm.
say.
Fantastic. So that is wonderful work that you're doing. And I know we have a brief time together, but I was hoping that we would have time now to open up for some questions from the champions. And I did just see one pop up in the chat box. What is the cold chain system like for dengue vaccine?
Well, as I mentioned, the vaccine is meant to be stored at normal fridge conditions, 2 to 8 degrees. So it does not require a special, low or ultra low storage conditions like some other vaccines.
So, like, for example, similar to flu vaccine?
Yes, exactly. Similar to the flu
Hmm.
vaccines. Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat. Um,
Mhm.
so that was the answer to the cold chain. And here's another one that's coming up. I see it. Let's see if it pops up for both of us to see. If not, I will read it. So, what are clinical trial phases, and what does a phase 3 trial mean?
Okay. So there are three main phases: the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 clinical trials are typically small scale trials, usually involving like 20 individuals per arm, and it's used to evaluate an initial clinical evaluation of the safety, side effects, best dosing schedule, and timing of a new treatment or vaccine. Okay, so you can imagine that there are small cohorts because there are so many variables that you are clinically evaluating. The results from the phase 1 trial gives a good idea to the investigators or to the sponsor as to what would be, about the safety profile of the vaccine, what are the most convenient doses and immunization schedules that they need to follow. So that goes then into a phase 2 trial that again evaluates less conditions but larger number of individuals and focuses on immunogenicity and safety. When you go to a phase 3 trial, by then you have, based on the results from the phase 1 and 2 trials, you have selected the optimal dose that you believe is the optimal dose
Mhm.
and immunization schedule. And that's a very large
Mhm.
uh, a clinical trial. It usually involves tens of thousands of individuals. And in this trial is when you actually continue to look into safety and now evaluate the efficacy of the vaccine, because you have such a large number that it allows you for proper statistical analysis. For our phase 3 clinical trial, we included over 20,000 participants.
Wow, that's expansive
Mhm,
and really gives us confidence when a vaccine gets to that phase and has such a large number of participants.
mhm.
Uh, I have one more question here. Is it true that a dengue infection confers long life immunity against the disease? Here it is, it's popping up for us now. What
Mhm.
implications does this have?
Okay, that is partially true. Let's remember that there are 4 serotypes of dengue: 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Okay, if you get infection with one serotype, usually confers long-lasting immunity, perhaps lifelong protection against that particular serotype, and also short-term protection against the other 3. Short-term, about between a couple of months up to a maximum of a couple of years, no more than that. Unfortunately, that same immunity that gives you short-term protection against the other 3 serotypes actually turns against you eventually.
Oh, mhm.
So if you are unlucky enough to be exposed to one of those other 3 serotypes in the future, the likelihood of suffering a more serious outcome from that infection is greater. Okay, because not only you are not protected, because you're not protected to begin with, but even the initial immunity from that other infection makes you more susceptible to a more serious outcome. If you're infected, you get a second infection with one of the other 3 serotypes.
Wow. That's important information to know, and we've learned that through our COVID experience as well, haven't we? The impact of that. Um, let's see. I've got another question here.
Mhm.
Um, it says in Canada and Chile, cold weather that there it is from Felicia. There she is. So in Canada and Chile, cold weather that may do not have dengue vaccine, or how did they prevent the disease in those countries?
Yes, in great part is the weather, and it's the weather that pretty much has prevented yet the mosquito from establishing itself in those countries. It's not only having the mosquito; you have to have the mosquito already carrying the virus. So the
Mhm.
mosquito is not there, so there is no local transmission of the disease. Of course, people living in those countries or any other country that travel to endemic countries do risk getting infected in those countries and bring back the disease, to their home countries. But local transmission in those countries has not been reported.
Thank you. And then we have just a couple of minutes left, and I have a couple of questions. Um, do we screen for dengue? Is there a screening process? From Diane.
Oh yes, there is a screening process for dengue. If it's an acute infection, the PCR, or sometimes depending on the infection, when the symptoms show up, you can do an IgM for dengue
Mhm.
antibodies. If there is a if you are wondering whether you have been previously exposed to dengue, years past, there are some tests that have been developed for that to also detect the antibodies to a prior dengue infection. But if it's an acute infection, it's done by PCR mostly.
Thank you. And then it looks like we have 1 minute, so I'm going to ask a final question. Um, how long have the phase 3 trials taken? That's from Diane.
Yes. Well, it depends on the vaccine, but this particular vaccine, the phase 3 trial, has lasted 4.5 years up to now. And there is the first 3 parts of the clinical trial. Now, there is a booster phase that is ongoing for 2 additional years. So, altogether, it's going to be 6.5 years of evaluation.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And 6.5 years is reassuring. Um, and I just want to thank you for your time today and for joining and allowing the vaccine, our champions, to meet with you and interact with you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosas. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully sometime in the future.
So do I. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail and Dr. Rosas, for this really interesting discussion about dengue. Sounds like some really exciting things are happening at Takeda and in the vaccine science space.